So welcome today. We have the pleasure of having Rosemary Watkins today, a psychotherapist, trainer and supervisor. Rosemary is an experienced therapist, trainer and group facilitator, and she's worked with individuals, couples and families for over 23 years. The main focuses of her practice are loss, grief, trauma and relationships, and Rosemary has provided training to professionals in London, Ireland, Singapore and of course Australia. Rosemary offers courses in meditation, mindfulness and relaxation also, and practices and runs residential workshop retreats for therapists and other health professionals. Rosemary, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Matthew, and I think it's wonderfully sort of foresighful of you to provide this and to think about doing something like this at a time of such unprecedented uncertainty.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And look, we really appreciate it. And really, in terms of the situation right now, where there's this kind of guidance from you is really needed for our people, meaning the travel agents out there, they're going through a traumatic time. They're experiencing a lot of stress. They're being pulled in many directions by things like the demands of fearful and frustrated customers. Also, there's a constant avalanche of ever-changing information to sort through, the financial stress, and also the health concerns for themselves and their loved ones, and also all of the uncertainty. So much pressure from so many different angles. And what's good advice on how to deal with these many stresses effectively is really what's needed right now. So having you with us today is really valuable to everyone with us today and watching this. I thought I might start with a question around, with so much pressure from so many places right now, what are some of the first steps that travel agents can take to reduce their stress levels?
Yes, it's certainly a very stressful time for workers in all fields nowadays, and I can well imagine the impact on travel agents, given that you're sort of in the firing line there with a lot of it, with flights being cancelled and borders being closed, etc. The first thing will be for people to recognize what specific stressors they're experiencing, and what are related to for them. So some people it'll be financial, might be the most significant one. For some others it might be the future and what that holds for them, or it might be their health or fearing losing a loved one. So the stressors can be different to the virus. If people are worried about having an elderly relative, for example, that might contract the virus and not make it. Those sorts of things can be uppermost in different people's minds. And so first identifying what specific area of that would be more troublesome or more stressful for them. And there could be a combination, obviously, too, for the travel agents in that. So identifying it first, and then looking at what the meaning they're making of that in terms of their ability to cope with it. So the perception that we have around our coping with the situation will determine how severe that stressor impacts our lives physically. And there's certainly research to suggest that if we live under too much stress for too long and don't manage it or reduce it, that it can impact our cardiac function and all elements of our physical health. And so it is important that they would recognize that level of stress that they're under and what's contributing to it for them, and then how they might be perceiving their ability to cope with it.
Yes, different people can have different reactions to the same stressor, and taking that into consideration is quite important as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's a stress for one person may not necessarily be a stress for another person, but definitely that perception of coping and managing whatever it is going to be the key to defining it for themselves. And a big part of this today is the uncertainty that we're facing in a global way, that for many people, when they've gone through the stress of losing a relative in accidents or illness or cancer, that kind of thing, they've come to an awareness of life and life's uncertainty that many people don't experience because they've gone through something significant in terms of loss in their lives. But now the global pandemic has sort of extrapolated that to a much broader community of people. And as humans, and especially in the last sort of 100 years or so, we've really moved more and more to try and control life and feel certain about life. And so what happens is that people build more and more certainty and get identified and connected to different aspects of their life and surround themselves with doing things and having things and in our material world that all contributes to a kind of certainty and a belief then that we will come in one end and go out the other about age 80 or 90. What is lost is the illusion of certainty, and the grief and the sadness and the fear can all be about now kind of waking up in a way, coming to an awareness of life's uncertainty for the first time. It's like it's come right off the back burner. It's always been there, but it's come right off the back burner and really been front and foremost for us to look at. Life is uncertain.
I think that's a really good point, right? So the reality is that life is uncertain, and sometimes we get caught up in a belief that it is supposed to be certain, and so that can even that belief that it's supposed to be certain when it's not can cause us stress as well. And I remember we were talking before. You mentioned that one of the best first steps that you can do if you find yourself, let's say you've had a stressful customer conversation or some sort of conversation, and you could say, like I think you were saying before, rather than diving into the next customer conversation, remove yourself from that situation. And let's say I'm a team member of that person, I can go with them and remove them from that situation and then go through, I think what you said, a bit of a debriefing. And can you talk a little bit more about the debriefing and what that means and how that helps?
Yep, definitely. So you could go for that walk with them and even walk around the block or the car park and do the debriefing. It doesn't have to be sitting, but then you could sit with them and do the debriefing and asking them, inviting them what they need around that. Because sometimes if they're very stressed, they might even be able to articulate straight away what they want. So you're watching, being alert to how they are, and then inviting them to just be with where they're at now. It might be that they have a good cry at that moment, that there's so much emotion that they need to release, and it comes out in tears, which is absolutely welcome as well. Being able to be with our feelings is another whole area of being able to manage stress well.
There's been some tears, I can tell you that. I'm surprised. I think travel agents have probably used more tissues. We've been hoarding the tissues rather than the toilet paper, I think.
Yeah, good. When people are having to, miss out on their holidays or that sort of thing. So being able to allow themselves the tears if they're feeling that level of stress would be very, very good and welcomed. And then in the debrief, if they want to talk, let them talk. If they want to, question you as to what you might have done differently, don't rush into answering that, but to maybe, because that can disempower them more than empower. So you want to more go back and see what they're left with. What feelings are they left with after the conversation? What thinking are they left with? What sort of things would they like to have done differently? So you kind of gently hold it back to them to find the solution, that answer in their best self, rather than maybe necessarily providing an answer of, well, I would have done this or that or the other. And so that can more come to more disempowerment than a help or an empowerment.
The other thing I really wanted to ask you is maybe being prepared before that it's going to be, let's say you've got a customer coming in an hour and it's not going to be a nice conversation because the information or the news you have to give them, they're not going to take it well. Not that you don't know that, I suppose. Here's me, living in a fearful future. Or maybe you're just trying to get out of bed in the morning and go, oh my gosh, I've got to go back to work again today. How can you be best prepared for that? What can you do prior to walking in the door or having to go into potentially tough conversations so you're in the best mindset?
Yeah, that's great. In the morning when they get out of bed, if you do think I have a tough day ahead and there's lots happening, one of the best ways to deal with that straight away would be to acknowledge it. Yep, I can know that that's going to happen today. But what's real in this moment right now is I'm here, going to enjoy my breakfast. What am I having, you know, or in the shower or whatever it is. And so being in the present moment as much as you can while you're in that present moment at home, not letting the meeting that's going to happen at 2 p.m. be with you over breakfast, you know. So, and be very mindful to your food and the taste and the nourishment and the whole, you know, really, and the people maybe that you're engaging with around the breakfast table, being fully present to them. Because also in our, if life, and we really is, and it is uncertain, when we know and live the uncertainty of life, we don't live without a fear anymore, we live without a great joy. And that's the potential. So that you wouldn't want to miss that breakfast with the family by thinking of the 2 p.m. meeting with the tough client. Yeah. So you really want to be present to that breakfast and to the food and to that moment of really pleasure in that moment that I'm having and being alive and present to it. Because life is uncertain, it might be the last one I have, you know. And so we move, if we live it from the joy place rather than the fear place, it can bring a lot, slows down life. Kids know how to do this really well, you know, pets know how to do this really well. We're humans, we don't do it well at all, you know, adults.
It's funny you mentioned that. I remember when having 3 kids myself, when they were little, very little, right? And certain things, like I take them outside when they're really little and they get the wind on their face and there'll be a big smile and they'll be all excited. And that just reminds you of the little things in the moments. And what you're saying, I suppose, is rather than live in this future that hasn't even happened yet, if you're doing that, you're missing out on what's right in front of you. And really, and embracing that and being grateful for that. And then, yes, accepting that I will have to have that conversation on what they be, but it's not going to let me miss out on it right now.
Exactly. And it's not happening now anyway. So it might never happen, really, but it's happening.
Very true. Very true.
It's happening now. And so then when we do go to the conversation, then getting closer to that time, in present moment, preparing yourself for it then will be, because the more you've done that with the breakfast actually and the family, the more in your real self and that kind of authentic self and grounded self you will be, then the more the conversation is likely to go better than be stressful for you, you know? So because what you're not deciding is that, say, someone else's behaviors, like even with someone else's bad behavior, for example, doesn't necessarily have make you behave badly, you know, it's that kind of sense. So someone else's extreme emotional stress right now doesn't have to bring me out of my equilibrium. Yeah.
And we're getting into probably another really good question for you is that, let's say I am in a conversation with a customer and they are frustrated, or, you know, how can we best navigate that you know, for ourselves and the customer, and so we can improve that conversation or the frustration or stress levels within it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things will be to empathize with their position, to really acknowledge that they have a very valid emotional experience now to this situation. So say their flight has been cancelled or something like that, and they're desperate. It was like they've saved up for ages, and you know, they're really in a distressed place because of what they're hoping would happen, and now it's not happening. And so you, by listening and validating, acknowledging, but you'll only be able to do that if you're comfortable in yourself and you're tuned into the fact that your life and your world is different. So empathy means that we are aware of our own world and we can take one step into their world to understand it from how they're experiencing it. So it's different than sympathy or other methods, but empathy does get confused sometimes. Like we go in there imagining what we might do in there, that's not empathy. But if we go in there as if it was our world, but with knowledge that it's not, you know, that's what will give the real empathic experience to somebody. So they get that we know, they'll know we know, and you know, we know their heart. So there's that kind of joining that can happen, and it can be like literally putting a pin in a balloon, you know, when people feel heard, feel validated, feel understood, that they can manage, and we trust that they are the best experts in their lives, then they will manage and come up with a solution themselves to this. So
I think that's a really good point you raise in terms of sometimes agents can go into a conversation and go the sympathetic path where they really take on the emotion of the clients and how they're feeling, but what you're saying is there that be very aware of that. you and the client are different. But with empathy, knowing that you're different, but stepping in to understand the customer is the practical approach here, or the best approach to do it, rather than fully being the customer. You know,
Exactly.
still being aware of yourself, and that you are different, and you don't have to take it all on, but you can step in there to understand, so you can best help them in that situation.
Exactly. And then through that, you can bring compassion to it. You know, you can feel sad for that happening through a compassionate way, still without making it your own sadness. You know, if that makes sense. It's like,
yes.
yeah.
And let's say customers will still remain frustrated. Let's say they still do that, and this probably goes back to that story you were telling me about the at the university, and how do you deal with those situations? You know, with the customers that still remain frustrated after empathizing with them.
Yeah, and they'll come up with all sorts of reasons, you know, and explanations why you should. If you hold an awareness that generally there's some vulnerability there for them, and they're desperately trying to control it by getting you to do something different. So they're trying to manage their own feelings of vulnerability and stress by trying to get you to behave in a way that, you know, they think will help them. So by being with the situation, then, and you know you can't change it, it's not in your influence and it's not in theirs, then they know it's not on one level, but they're desperately trying to make it back they're in control. So by reflecting, validating again that experience, and then just being patiently persistent, I guess is the better way to say that. Patience and persistence to repeat what is. And again, you're coming into the present moment, the isness of this, rather than what you'd love to have. Yeah? You can acknowledge that you'd love to have it, but this is what real, like the flights have been cancelled, the borders have been closed. We will need to turn you back. Yeah, you will need to.
What was that university story? If you could tell
That
us.
was a good. We had one group of students that had a popular time for a tutorial that we only could fit. We would only, you know, one tutorial at that time. We have tutorials all through the week, but this particular tutorial was really popular, and they were all pressuring the administration person to put them into that tutorial. And they would come, they phoned up, they emailed, they would come in present moment into the desk to her, and she was getting terribly stressed. And I gave her this strategy to manage. And I said, you know, breathing into yourself, coming into your own centered self, and then just repeat, that tutorial is full. And just leave it with them to see what, but I really need it because my kids are being picked up or looked after or whatever it might be. I really need that time, I really need that time. And just repeating that in that persistent, patient way, I can really get that, and I hear it, and I know you'd love to have that, but that tutorial is still full. And that sense of that tutorial is still full became a mantra for some of them as they went through the university later, recognizing their own desire to control others by managing their stress, you know.
And for travel agents, it could be that flight is still cancelled. That flight is cancelled. I understand and I get it, and I can empathise, but the flight is still cancelled, or the cancellation fees still apply. I empathise and I see your frustration in that, but the cancellation fees still apply. And I think that's a great tip as well. Staying, and it's almost, as you said, being repetitive with it. That repeating that line over and over again, because that is what is, you know. And as you say, while we would love to be able to change that situation for the customer, it's not what is.
Not possible.
Yeah. One of the last questions I have is that if people want help with this, to deal with you know, to get guidance during this time, what's out there for them?
I think there's a really important to separate out, like how, again, identifying in themselves what level of risk are in their families or loved ones, you know, and if there's a level of risk at all in the overwhelm, in terms of their safety particularly, then it's really important that either a family member takes some action or helps them to reach out to a crisis helpline or a GP or an emergency department to really get some help, that they deserve life and living, and it's important that they can give themselves that knowledge of, you know, reaching out for support, that there are lots of supports out there, and it really is important that they reach out, particularly if they feel really overwhelmed into a point of putting that they're at risk in any way, or of hurt or harm, or not being safe. If it triggers any questions like that for themselves, the line, first port of call can always be that crisis helpline of 13 11 14. That's 13 11 14 13 14, or the Beyond Blue website they could look up if they're feeling very depressed with it. Because under stresses like this, people with maybe a propensity or a predisposition, say in the family, for depression, a genetic predisposition, can find themselves maybe going into a full-blown depression place rather than, say, stress. So it's important to know the distinctions there too, and be alert to when things get more serious from a mental health point of view, and their family members can be alert to that also and help them get support. The GP then would be a good protocol in terms of getting some support under either a mental health plan. The GPs generally have access to a good database of therapists in the area. If it's not in that severe category where they need some mental health support, then certainly there's some online counselling supports now too. Headspace would be a good option to look into for younger people, up I think till about 25, I think the age for Headspace. And then looking at resources, online books and things, you know, they could access. There's often anxiety workbooks and change your thinking books that you can, I think Sarah Edelman has written that book on change your thinking, which really helps to look at the way, what we're telling ourselves and how that's influencing our negative, you know, view of life and our negative perception perhaps of how we're coping with something or could cope with something. And then to relax and help the relaxation elements, there's lots of centres around the place that will offer support in that way. They may not be as much available now in the physical sense, given the social distancing we need to engage in and group sizes and so forth. But online again, there's an app called Calm, C-A-L-M, and there's one called Insight Timer. That's insight as in having insight, I-N-S-I-G-H-T, and timer, T-I-M-E-R. They can be downloaded for free and have a range of experiences in terms of meditation, relaxation, that could be available in from short to longer versions, you know, for minutes, for them, 10 minutes or so. And so that would be some suggestions I'd have. And definitely then if they, you know, want any further help, the Psychological Society, the APS, can be a good source of having numbers available. So the GP is always a first line of call, or the Psychotherapists Counsellors Federation of Australia, PACFA, the PACFA, they can go on there and find a therapist, or AFT, the Australian Association of Family Therapy, or the social workers, the Mental Health Social Worker Association. So it's quite a range of the associations. Will nearly always have a member directory that people can look up for the practitioners, mental health practitioners in the field.
That's great. And just for our viewers as well, we will, and Rosemary being a very experienced therapist, we will be putting Rosemary's details on here as well, if you'd like to use Rosemary's services as well. But look, just to finish off, Rosemary, we really can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your insights and your guidance for our travel agents out there at the moment. I think the insights that you've given us today in terms of practical approaches to dealing with stressful situations, some of the things we covered with, you know, the breathing and making, you know, using your deep breathing to get back into present, being a good team member and removing a team member from, you know, after they've had a stressful conversation, allow them to just go for a walk and maybe joining them to have a bit of a debrief. So as you say, when you can get the words out, it's a way to help as well. And other things that, you know, looking out for those signs of stress in the team, I think it's really helpful. And then even, as you said before, like recognizing a potential future, but don't live there. Live in the present right now. What can you do right now, and what's real right now? And I love the fact that when you talked about, you know, if you get up in the morning and you have got a conversation with a customer about a cancellation in the afternoon. It doesn't have to ruin your breakfast. Enjoy your breakfast, enjoy the time with your family, you know, and you know, make sure that you're not missing out on appreciating right now because of something that may or may not happen in the future. And when it does happen, as you say, approach it with empathy, but understand that we are different to the customer. We can empathize, but we still have to be aware of that. We are different, and we are definitely here to help. We have to deal with what is, even if we want a much better outcome, we have to deal with what is. So all of those things have been extremely helpful. I'm sure there's many things I didn't say that you said during our interview as well, that we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us, Rosemary.
You're very welcome, Matthew. Thank you. And can I just add one last little bit to maybe for families and the travel agents? Looking at, say, what we call the 5 of the best, you know, at the end of the day with their family can be a really useful way of focusing in again on present moment and gratitude. So like the best thing that someone did for me today, the best thing that I did for someone, the best thing I saw today, the best thing I ate today, you know, the simple things like that, the best thing, any number of best things, you know, but using 5, again, using senses, the best thing I touched today or ate, that kind of thing. And I want to say the travel agents do such wonderful work, and my invitation to them would be to trust, and this will turn around. Again.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And I think the best thing that we've done today is have this interview with you, and so we can share it with our community. Once again, Rosemary, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Matthew. Bye-bye now. Thank you.